if the addiction didn't begin with the person holding the bottle or using the drug? What if the roots of that struggle were planted generations ago? A grandfather's drinking, a mother's hidden addiction, or a son's overdose. Welcome to the Heritage of Hush podcast. I'm Wanda Williams-Bailey, your host. Today's episode confronts this question: what happens when addiction becomes a family secret? For many families, alcohol and substance abuse remain hidden behind the closed doors or unspoken conversations. These challenges are not only personal struggles, but also legacies that shape lives in silence. In this discussion, we will identify these patterns, the pain, the struggles, family trauma, and explore paths to healing. We are joined by Dr. Victoria Shedrick, a licensed mental health professional and clinical consultant with expertise in trauma and family dynamics. Welcome, Dr. V.
Thank you so much, Wanda. I appreciate you having me on again.
Please note, this episode will discuss alcohol, drug addiction, trauma, and emotional neglect. Listener discretion is advised. Please prioritize your well-being and listen when you feel ready. Let's begin. Dr. V, is there a difference in behavior between someone who drinks excessively and someone who uses drugs?
That's a really good question. Alcohol addiction and drug addiction share many common features, as both involve compulsive substance use despite harmful consequences. However,
Mm-hmm.
the behaviors people exhibit can differ depending on the specific substance, its effects on the brain and body, and the individual stage
Mm-hmm.
of addiction, how frequent they're using, etc.
I see. So when we talk about family secrets, why does alcohol or substance abuse become one of the most common secrets families keep?
Shame is often at the heart of it. Families worry about being judged by the other relatives, neighbors, church, schools, and even at work. And instead of facing the problem, they might try to hide it. And you'll hear statements like, well, of course, don't tell anyone about this, or the minimalization of the behavior, such as, your dad is just tired, or mom's just under a lot of stress, right? Everything's
Mm-hmm.
fine. Everything's fine. And that's not just something they say outwardly, that's something they're telling themselves also. But
Mm-hmm.
as time goes on, keeping the secret can become just as important to the family as dealing with the addiction, sadly.
Interesting. So in this context, it's the same, it's sort of the same scenario. The family becomes focused on protecting appearances, correct?
That's exactly right. Yes. Sometimes everyone in the family knows something is wrong, but no one is wanting to talk about it. And so this silence can just become a normal part of how the family functions.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I find that children often pick up on things. Kids are a little smarter than what we perceive, these days, even when adults believe they are keeping them hidden.
Yeah, absolutely right about that. Um, Kids can pick up on changes in mood. They can pick up on arguments. They can also notice when there's an absent of a parent, or don't think they don't know about legal problems, or for sure broken promises where a mom or a dad may promise to do something. And unfortunately and sadly, that might become something they get accustomed to, that this individual isn't going to come through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they start, of course, preparing themselves mentally for whatever ups and downs they might have to encounter when they get home. you know? So
Hmm.
even if no one tells them, they know that something isn't right.
I hear you. I understand. I have often heard these comments.
Hmm.
My grandfather drinks, my father drinks, and now my brother's struggling
Hmm.
with alcohol.
Hmm.
Why do these patterns repeat?
Well, there are a few reasons for this, and some may have a genetic risk for addiction. Also, learned behavior. Children growing up tend to see what others are doing, and they start to model that themselves. So if a child is watching adults use alcohol to deal with stress, sadness, anger, loneliness, or even to celebrate, they might start to believe that using substances is the main way to handle their feelings.
Hmm. And what you describe about, the consumption of alcohol and being in the presence with young people, that's why you have to be so aware of what's going on when you're
Hmm.
dealing with young people, because that
Absolutely.
can influence their decisions. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so I have a question,
Hmm.
or just more of a statement than a question, I should
Okay.
say. Of course, the addiction can then become normalized, is what I was going to lead into.
Yes, absolutely. When a child hears things like, well, everybody drinks, or this is how men handle stress, or you know what, this is just a little something to calm my nerves, right?
Hmm.
Or a little drink isn't gonna hurt anything, and that sort of again minimizes the behavior, and the child doesn't view it then as problematic. It's normal. They're accustomed to seeing bottles around the house. They know,
Hmm.
okay, every Friday night, this is what to expect. There might be, drugs and different things around, people coming in and out. You just never know the things that are happening in certain environments, but kids start to identify those patterns. And so these messages and these patterns start to have a very strong influence. Absolutely.
Okay, then what are some of the family roles that develop around the addiction
Mm.
in this case?
That's a good question. Family roles often develop around addiction. Um, I'd say it can include a few different scenarios. One, you might have the overly responsible child. That's a role. This is the
Hmm.
child that is going to take charge. They're going to be overachievers. They excel in school. They start becoming caretakers for their siblings, younger siblings, especially. And this is the child that's working to make the family appear normal. That's really sad if you think about it, because the child should not take on that kind of role, but
Absolutely.
yet they
Hmm.
do.
Hmm.
Then you have what I call the rescuer. This is the child that may step in to constantly save or try to shield the addicted family member from consequences. And that's essentially the child acting out of love, obviously,
Hmm.
and wanting to be protective, which again is sad because adults should protect children, not the other way around. And then the next is what I refer to as the lost child. This might be the child that withdraws completely. They
Hmm.
become invisible within the family dynamic. They go to their room. They deal with it in their own way, just silently carrying all the things, not talking about it, not acknowledging it. So, those are some of the roles that might come and develop around addiction.
Well, then I was going to ask you this question. You described the family roles
Hmm.
are usually taken on by children, and I was going to ask you, why is that? Is there a little more you can elaborate in their behaviors?
Sure, sure. Well, children notice changes in stress in families. And, when addiction happens, parents may not give the usual support and structure that the kids need. They need structure. And so when a child needs structure, they start to, I mean, they could go one or two ways. Either they're going to, um, you know, uh, act out in some way without the structure, or they're going to try to provide it themselves. And so
Mhm.
oftentimes what you'll see is kids taking on extra responsibilities and certain roles, as I mentioned earlier, to try to help keep the family going. They might do this to keep things stable, to meet
Mhm.
their own needs. I mean,
Mhm.
you got to eat, right? And if
Yes.
mom is, too drunk to cook, who's cooking? It's the kid, right?
Mhm.
And they're going to
Mhm.
try to do their best to make some noodles or some hot dogs or whatever it is they got to do. And so, um, these are just things that children learn as a way to adapt to the environment.
Mhm.
And really, they're essentially growing too fast, right? And they're stepping into adult roles. And so um, that can lead to problems later, even in adulthood.
I'm sure. I'm sure. So, what behaviors do families often develop when addiction becomes a secret?
Several patterns might emerge. One, the denial. That's the big one.
Mhm.
Family members, they want to downplay the problem or just
Mhm.
act like it's not even a thing, not even talking about it, right? Another one that's really big is enabling, right? Loved ones covering up the consequences, constantly bailing the individual out, not acknowledging that they have a problem, but really, in a way, um, they're continuing the problem. They're contributing to the problem. They're
Mhm.
giving them money and resources to buy the drugs or alcohol, right? They're bailing them out every time they go to jail so that essentially this person doesn't experience any consequences, right? Another pattern is hypervigilance. And this is where children start learning, sort of like a trauma response, really, where they're always watching out for moods and behaviors. They're constantly watching to see how the adults in their lives are going to show up from day to day. They start noticing again those patterns
Mhm.
and sort of anticipating the next blow up or whatever might come with, because there's always something that comes with addiction. Addiction rarely happens in isolation. It's usually going to be followed with something, and that something could be violence, right?
Mm.
Yeah. And
Mm.
so walking on eggshells, and this is where everyone's trying to avoid the conflict. They're trying not to antagonize the individual. They're not trying to get into it. They're just kind of um, you know, trying to maintain some peace. And then lastly, silence. Just we're not gonna talk about it at all. Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That sounds exhausting.
It actually,
And I'm an adult. That sounds exhausting.
yeah, it is. It's exhausting, not just for the children, but for the family in general. I think people need to really understand family members who are in a situation where there is a loved one that is addicted to drugs or alcohol. It is extremely exhausting. It is can be paralyzing because you feel like there isn't anything you can do to hurt to help. You feel helpless. But in the case of children, think about a child coming home from school, not knowing what kind of parent is going to be there when they get home. You know,
Mm.
that sort of
Yeah.
unpredictability, that
Mhm.
uncertainty. So they may go home questioning, you know, is mom going to be loving or is she going to be angry? Is dad going to be intoxicated or, is he going to be, playful? You just don't know. And living with that kind of uncertainty, Wanda, it causes ongoing stress.
Mhm. I can imagine. I had a moment. I was thinking about something because I worked with people,
Mm-hmm.
and from time to time, they did basically what you just described.
Yeah.
they lived in households, and a lot of them had to take the leading roles. And then there were other things that would play out up to and including trying to figure out, okay, who's my mom going to be today?
Right, right.
So I understand that.
Yeah,
That is
yeah,
so deep.
yeah.
And I was very sympathetic to, just what they or these individuals, young people described to me.
Mhm,
So it is something
mhm.
that's rather alarming
It
because
is.
they don't know what tomorrow will
Right,
bring.
absolutely,
Hmm. And I suppose many children carry that anxiety into their adulthood.
absolutely.
Hmm.
And, because what you just described, that's where they don't trust. You don't
Hmm.
know what version of mom you're going to get. You don't know what version of dad you're going to get. So there's no consistency. And when there's no consistency, there's no trust. So into
Hmm.
adulthood, they struggle with trust. They struggle with relationships, boundaries, even, and emotional regulation because unpredictability has been the norm.
Mm. Let's talk about children specifically in terms of how does growing up with the addiction affect them?
Mm. Children who grow up in homes where alcohol or drug addiction is present, they face emotional, behavioral, social, academic, and also even some developmental challenges. And these things may include anxiety and depression, low self esteem. Again, as I mentioned, trouble trusting others, feeling
Hmm.
isolated, and having difficulties in general with peers at school, getting along with other kids. Because it's not just the secret that they're carrying, but they're carrying all the things that they've had to see and bear witness to that they
Hmm.
shouldn't be seeing in a home, right?
Hmm.
And that's an awful lot to process for a kid.
You aren't kidding. An
Hmm.
awful lot.
Hmm.
So, in your experience, do teachers typically notice these changes in children before others during school time? Do they have? I mean, are they really that observant to know? Because I know they're dealing with what 30 students in a classroom setting, but does something sort of stand out? And do they have the training?
Well, I think usually they do, particularly if it's a child and there's been a major shift in their emotions or behaviors. So for instance, if one child might become quiet and keep to themselves all of a sudden, that might be something that might cause a
Hmm.
teacher to question, well, what's going on?
Hmm. Hmm.
You might have another child that starts to act out or show more anger than
Hmm.
usual. And that might
Hmm.
be anything that's out of character. Think a good teacher is gonna pick up on that. And some children may seem more grown up than others because again they're in that caretaker
Hmm.
role and they've had
This
to
is true.
handle adult responsibilities, and that might
Hmm.
not show up as being problematic, but it's definitely something worth noting and observing as an adult that works with kids for sure.
Hmm.
When you see a child that feels so responsible for so many things, and this can make them carry emotional weight. That's the part that you'll see,
Hmm.
is the emotional weight where they might look stressed. They might look
Hmm.
tired. They may look like they haven't slept. They may be sleeping in class even.
Hmm.
Those are
Hmm.
some things. As far as whether or not teachers have training on trauma informed sort of practices, I think we've come a very long way. And I think most school districts are working to make sure that we don't just view children as problems, but we view them in a way with compassion that they
Hmm.
just may be going through something at home.
Yes, and that should be noted. Red flags, the red flags that you
Absolutely.
mentioned, that
Hmm.
should be noted. Yes.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Can you anonymously share a story about a client or a patient
Hmm.
who is a parent struggling with addiction, or who grew up with a parent facing addiction. How about that?
Okay, I can. I can tell you about a little girl. She grew up in a household where her father drank very heavily. Mind you, it was in a household where no one said addiction, no one even used the word drunk. Those weren't words you heard. You just knew he drank a lot,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this little girl started seeing patterns. She knew that when her dad drank, uh-oh, it was a trigger. It was a sign. He would come in, words slurred, staggering in, and the pattern would usually go from that appearance sake, what you observe, to then the behavior of, yelling, becoming
Mm-hmm.
argumentative with his wife.
Mm-hmm.
That then turned into more violence.
Oh
And
yeah.
so this little girl started, once she noticed the pattern, him coming in, smelling like alcohol, she started learning, I gotta go protect myself. Let me go to my safe place. Let me just remove myself from this space because I already know what's gonna happen. And I'm gonna
Wow.
go to my room and I'm just
Mm-hmm.
going to, do my best to cover my ears to not hear what I'm about to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And this little girl grows up, obviously does not have the best relationship with her dad. In fact, to this day, there is no relationship with her dad because there was
Mm-hmm.
broken trust.
Oh
And,
yes.
and not just the broken trust,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing how he behaved when under the influence of alcohol, but seeing how he would obviously hurt her mother. And there was just a total disregard for anyone else but himself.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
that's and when as a little girl you grow up seeing that in your father figure, it then translates to this is how men are.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I might expect from a man. So, as an adult, this girl grows up and starts having issues with trusting men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not feeling safe around them, feeling that men are unpredictable and unreliable, just as her father was. And so I'm sure this is a story that many others can identify with, whether
Mm-hmm.
it was your father, your mother, grandmother, whomever your caretaker was. But yes, that's just one story.
I understand. Well, that's a heavy one, and that's that pattern that you talked about. And then she grows up, and she clearly knows
Hmm.
what she needs to engage in, or she's good, or could be withdrawn, and then a whole host of things may even evolve from that. And it's interesting because sometimes certain behaviors that you think a person would steer clear
Hmm.
of,
Hmm.
they end up getting into the same relationship.
Mm,
Sometimes that
that
happens.
is true. That is so true. Yeah,
Sometimes they get into the
yeah.
same
That
relationship.
that toxicity is what I call it. They're drawn to
Yes,
toxic
yes.
relationships because they grew up in a family dynamic where they observe toxicity and abuse and things of that nature. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's where the cycle repeats itself. But one
Mm-hmm.
thing about this particular case that I was sharing, it was the opposite for this young lady. She grew up to be hyper vigilant and also hyper independent. She never
Mm-hmm.
wanted to rely upon anybody to do anything because, again, it was like, I can't trust. adults in my life to show up the way I need them to. So I've got to
Mhm.
be it. I've got to keep myself safe. So you see how that can be a problem
Yeah.
though.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not always a good thing. You know,
Mhm.
we always salute being independent, but
Yes.
why
Yeah.
that's still
Mhm.
carrying more than you need to, because you're now the person that doesn't ask for help when you really need it. You're the person that feels like I have to be responsible for everything. And,
Mhm.
you know, and people aren't going to show up for me when that's really probably not true. So, what happens in these situations is core belief systems start developing, and it's really difficult to tear yourself away from these core beliefs. You start thinking, I can't trust people, or I can't trust men, or I can't trust women, or I can't, you see what I'm saying? These
Yes.
broad,
Yeah.
large
Mhm.
core beliefs that
Mhm.
stem from mom or dad or whomever.
Mhm.
That's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how that works.
Wow. Well, right now with so much going on in the world, life at home can be even tougher for kids. As I'm hearing you
Hmm.
explain, these behavior and patterns, and family problems are becoming more difficult to deal with,
Hmm.
because when kids suffer quietly, it can affect who they become and how they view the world. So it's sort of what
Yeah,
you already described.
absolutely.
That's what's
Absolutely.
happening. Hmm.
Exactly. The echoes of what children endure at home, it ripple.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's a ripple effect, and it ripples through all aspects of their life. And just
Mm.
to reiterate, it is essential for adults, children, excuse me, teachers, caregivers, neighbors, any
Hmm.
adult. It's important to listen closely
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
respond with compassion to kids who are in these situations. Because even the smallest gesture of understanding can really
Hmm.
change the way a child feels, how they view themselves, and also how they view the world. Like I said, we don't want kids growing up where they feel like they can't trust the adults in the world, and the world isn't safe. That's not what we want to do. So it doesn't take much to be kind. And so
Hmm.
that's what I hope um the adults will definitely do. And when they see a child that is going through hardship at home. And it's usually one. You hear of these stories where there might be a coach or a teacher or someone. I love when I hear stories of people, of kids who've gone through hardships, but there was someone in their life that
Hmm.
gave them some hope. So
Oh, yes.
yeah,
Just takes one person, one role
that's
model, which
it.
is so important.
Absolutely. That's
And we
it.
need to be mindful of that at every time we're exposed or, being around children, because this is why I always tell people all the time, be a role model, because
Hmm.
you never know who's watching.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
tell them all the time, be a role
That's
model.
good. Good.
Hmm. Okay, Dr. V, how does a secret survive in this context for generations?
Yeah. Well, it's again going back to these narratives that are created to avoid the truth. Not calling it what it really is, you know. So for example, he wasn't an alcoholic. He just drank every now and then, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Or
Hmm.
no, she didn't have a drug problem. She just liked to party, right? Or that's just how it is sometimes in this family, or anything to excuse, dismiss, minimize. That's how it survives. That's
Hmm.
what keeps it alive. It feeds the secret. Dare I say, it feeds the lie, because that's really what it is. We're
Hmm.
lying. You're lying to yourself, and you're lying to everyone else around you.
Hmm.
And at some point, you're going to have to come face to face with the truth. But yes, to answer the question, these secrets survive through the lies that are being told. And the details become buried, but again, the emotional impact, that can't be buried. That will always show up.
Interesting, because it's almost like the secret changes from, I guess, changes form,
Hmm.
I should say, but never disappears.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that's a good way to
Hmm.
put it. Where one generation hides the addiction, and then it's like the next generation inherits the pain and the addiction, which is a shame, right? The following generation, then they inherit the silence. And so, without any type of intervention, we're just talking about a cycle that just keeps going and going and going, right?
Mm, yeah. So, can the cycle be broken?
If there's truth, yes, healing begins with truth. I always say that. And it
Mm-hmm.
does take someone in the family that is willing to speak the truth, to say the thing
Mm-hmm.
out loud, to address the elephant in the room,
There you go.
right? To say this happened.
Mm-hmm.
I'm affected by it, or this is affecting us as a family. And you know what else
Mm.
they can say? We need help, because addiction is a disease. Let's keep that in mind. And
So true.
you can't, as family members, you want to be helpful. The best form of help is seeking professional help, honestly, because it is a lot to take. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging that reality, that is the first step.
And I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. A turning point towards healing.
Hmm.
So, we're at this point. As we wrap up, I can't help but think about how many families deal with these hidden struggles and how deeply they can impact children. Talking openly about these issues can make a difference, Dr. V. Do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah. Let's bring secrets to the light. Let's do that. You know?
Mhm.
Because secrets survive in the darkness, but we gotta bring it to the light. Let's bring truth to light. Um, I want your listeners to also know that again, healing begins when we do that first step of acknowledging the truth. Families don't have to remain trapped, because it can feel like that. It definitely
Mhm.
can feel like your hands are tied, you don't know what to do, you've exhausted all the options, but um just know awareness, being aware, it creates choices. Choice
Mhm.
creates change, and change creates hope. And with that in mind, I want to remind your listeners that there are lots of resources, even on your website, they can go to for resources.
Mhm.
It's important that family therapy be a part of healing some of these cycles. Support groups. There are support groups for family members, because you need support. It's an exhausting process to deal with a family member who's addicted to drugs or
Mhm.
alcohol. It really is. And you need support. Also, you need to be willing to have honest conversations with one another.
Mhm.
Start
Mhm.
having and creating healthy coping skills, that don't involve drugs and alcohol, setting boundaries. And that might mean even setting boundaries with the individual that, is struggling, you know? Instead of
Yeah.
enabling, you gotta set some healthy boundaries.
Mhm.
Um, and again, as we talk about children, if you don't have children, just know that their well-being, or excuse me, if you do have children, or even if you don't, children in general, we need to start realizing that the well-being of children is just as important as our own. And so we don't need to hesitate seeking help for them as well.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
those are just some things I would leave your listeners with. And I hope that they remember that healing always is much more powerful when it is shared with others.
That's good. That's good. Thank you, Dr. V, for sharing your expertise, compassion, and care on this topic. Thank you to our listeners for joining us today. At its core, Heritage of Hush is all about creating a community where healing can happen and every story is valued. By sharing our truths, we encourage others to do the same, which leads to transformation. At this time, we invite you to share your story for a chance to be featured in one of our upcoming episodes. To submit, please visit azizipennandpod.com for guidance and instructions. Thank you for listening. Please share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. The last episode will be released on Thursday, August 13th at 7 a.m. Follow and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Facebook. Until next time, remember that Heritage of Hush is a place where silence breaks, secrets speak, and healing begins. Take care and stay safe.